Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I'm Joya Goodrum with the McMinnville Chamber. I am honored to have you here today joining us. Heather Richards, the city planner for McMinnville, is here to talk about the Urban Growth Boundary Expansion Plan. And I'm just going to turn it over to Heather. Everyone is on mute. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat and we will get to them at the end. Heather, thank you so much for being here today and really appreciate everything you've done on behalf of this particularly important issue. Thanks.
Thank you. So yes, hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Heather Richards, the Planning Director for the City of McMinnville. I actually really appreciate the opportunity to be able to bring to you a dialogue about our urban growth boundary. This is hot off the presses as of yesterday afternoon at 2:45. And I just finished putting this presentation together about 15 minutes ago. So we are working on this. We're working on a UGB expansion plan. This is a very litigious environment that we're working in. So I wanted to give you forewarning. You're gonna hear some stuff in the presentation that I need to put in there for legal reasons. It may be dry and boring to you, but we will get to the good stuff. We do have a recommended UGB land expansion plan for the City Council and the Board of County Commissioners to consider. And we do have this scheduled to go to public hearing in December with both decision-making bodies. And so our intention now is to get out and talk to people about what the recommendation is and why we're making it so that people can participate in the public hearing process if they want to do so and do so in an informed manner. So today what I want to do is share with you sort of the journey we've been on and how we've gotten to where we are, and then also give you the opportunity to ask me questions or city staff questions after the presentation. I will share with you last night at City Council, our legal experts, attorneys, we have a couple of attorneys working with us on this project, advised City Council members that they could not participate in these public information sessions because this is being viewed as a quasi-judicial process in some regards. And the reason for that is we are in a response to a Court of Appeals decision. So we're in a legal environment. And we don't want the city's efforts to be legally obstructed based on procedures. If there is a problem with the content, that's one thing, but procedures is something that we can all control. So if there are city council candidates on the line as well, the advice to you is, if you didn't hear it last night, is that if this doesn't make it through the City Council and Board of County Commissioners by the end of this calendar year, and any of the candidates are elected into office, if you are listening in on this public information session, that will be considered ex parte contact in your role come January and February. So you are also advised not to participate at this level too. So that's my legal language, but let's get to the good stuff, which is the actual presentation and the map. And I'm gonna tell you the map doesn't start is not at the beginning. So for those of you who are anxiously waiting for the map, you will have to wait through the description of why we're at where we're at. So I'm hoping you can all see my screen. Good. Okay. So holy smokes, this is the way I feel about growth planning in McMinnville. I've been here 4 years. I have gone through growth planning before in another community. And it was a fairly collaborative, fun experience and successful. And the journey was fairly short journey to get there. Here in McMinnville, it's a slightly different story. And when we talk about growth here, this is a shot that I have used in my presentations for the last 3 years. For the first 3 years I was here, because this is kind of the reaction we got from people when we started talking about, look, we really need to conclude this growth planning discussion in McMinnville. It's been going on for about 26 years now, and it's been one that's been tough. People have very strong opinions on both sides, and it has become legal, and so we have found ourselves in this environment. So when I like to put it into perspective for people, though. I mean, everyone has a fear of change and anxiety about anything changing in McMinnville because they love it so much, and that's the great piece of all of this. However, we also want our future generations to be able to live here and work here and love it as much as we do. So this really is a discussion about future generations. And usually it's at least 5 generations of people that will be living here in terms of the built environment. Built environment typically lasts at least 100 years, and it could last longer. So it's important, the decisions that we're making as we go through this process. And we do growth planning. Per Oregon land use law, we have to plan for growth for 20 years. We have to have a planning horizon of 20 years. And we are provided the numbers from the state that we have to plan for. So I've had a lot of people say to me, well, we don't want to grow. Why do we have to plan for all these new people to come to McMinnville? That's not really our choice. The state tells us how many people we should plan for, because the whole intent of that is as population grows, we need to have land to develop housing and employment opportunities for them, or we find ourselves getting into a predicament where it becomes unaffordable. And that's unfortunately where we are beginning to get here in McMinnville. So McMinnville needs to expand its urban growth boundary. And I don't think that the need to expand has really been the issue. For some, they're not supportive of growth, but most people understand it needs to expand. The real issue has been how it expands. So does it expand with density, or does it expand with a planned development similar to what's occurring today? And then where does it expand? Because we're surrounded by farmland that everyone values. And so, you know, what parcels of land do we expand into? And that's really been that contested dialogue for the last 20 years. And there has been opposition and legal challenges and appeals up and down the chain of decision-making here in the state of Oregon for McMinnville. McMinnville is actually known as the poster child now for struggling to get through this process. So when we first started talking about growth planning a couple of years ago, this is where we were at. We were just like, how do we move forward as a community and have this discussion in a constructive, positive way that feels good? And is there a path forward? Is there a way to get through the system? And at times it felt like this. I'll be quite frank with you. I've been a planning for 25 years. I've been a planning director for 15 years now. And I just couldn't figure out how we were going to get through this as a community. However, we eventually got to a point where we were like, let's take a step back. Let's think about this. Let's try to put the past behind us and really think about what it means to move forward and focus on those future generations. That's what we're doing this for. It's not a battleground. It's really a collaborative effort to think about how are we going to serve our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren so that they can live in the same environment that we love so much. So in terms of McMinnville, here's a quick snapshot of where we're at. So McMinnville is beginning to gentrify. We have the data markers to show that. We are showing that we are displacing lower and moderate income households with households of wealth. We have a deficit of about 1,000 homes in our community in terms of housing supply. So we are in a seller's market. We have more demand than we have supply, and it has created an affordability issue. It has created an affordability issue for both home buying and for renting homes and also for renting apartment units. And we are watching the prices of both types of housing products in the community growing at a fairly exponential rate in the last couple of years. Homelessness is increasing in McMinnville. Our average home sales price in 2019 was $398,000. Our household income for the same year was $55,000. Employers are losing employees due to housing scarcity. So we are hearing from employers that either one, they're having a hard time recruiting people because they can't find a place to live, or they're actually losing employees because the employees no longer feel like this is a place where their children can live in the future, or that the cost of living has gotten so high in terms of housing that they're moving on to other communities where they can reduce that cost. Our last successful UGB amendment was actually our first one, which was adopted in 1981. And I told you we do it for a 20-year planning horizon. That adoption in 1981 was for the planning horizon of 1980 to 2000. And then we have been working ever since then on the next planning horizon. We started work on this in 1994 for a planning horizon of 2000 to 2020, so the next 20 years. And that is where we're at today. We still have not been successful getting that through. It has been actively challenged for 10 to 15 of the last 25 years, trying to put together this 20-year planning horizon. And as a planner, I get the irony of that we're planning for 20 years and it's taking more than the planning horizon to get through our system. There's something broken there. In that time frame, we have spent $1 million on this effort as a community. So we're at a critical juncture. We are running out of land to develop for housing. And UGB expansions, once they're approved, that land does not come in immediately. You're still looking 5 years out for that land to come in and actually develop as housing. So when I say we're running out of land to develop for housing today, we're still, even if we were successful tomorrow with a UGB amendment, we are still 5 years out on that supply coming in and developing. So it is a timely issue that we're facing. Our building permits that we've issued for residential construction, I shared with you, we're about 1,000 homes in deficit. So that's creating the supply issue, and housing is a market commodity. A lot of people sometimes struggle with that because I get a lot of questions about, well, why can't you just make developers and people who own apartment complexes rent it for less or sell it for less? We can't afford that. Well, it's private market. It's a market commodity. So if there is limited supply and high demand, the price of it goes up. This shows our building permits through 2017 and where we have been in the past and where we are today. So we've been we're averaging about 100 units per year in deficit. I will tell you, if I updated this graph, 2018 and 2019 would hover up here around the 200. And then right now in this year, I just pulled the statistics for that yesterday. We are at 132 permits. And we typically don't issue a lot of permits in the winter time, so I don't suspect we'll see a lot more in this calendar year with that. A lot of people say, well, you know, the early 2000s right here, that was a really high growth period for McMinnville. That's not the norm. And so this is the permitting levels from 1990 to 2017. These are in 5-year increments. And you can see that in the last 10 years, it's been a lot less than the previous 20 years. So we are not, even though it feels like to some people we are building at an enormous rate right now, it's because it's all concentrated in one area because our land supply has gotten so constrained. But we really, in terms of housing development, we're developing a lot more in a time period in the last 20 years when we had less population. In terms of constrained land supply, when we scrub the maps to see where are there developable acres in McMinnville, we have, I will share with you, our housing developers here, the ones that you are familiar with, are each working on their last housing project. So Rudins are working on their last phase of their subdivision, and they don't have any other land to develop in McMinnville. And Premier is working on their last project, and when they're done, they will not have any more land to develop in McMinnville. Howard Astert is building out his project over here in the West Hills right now, and he's doing it slowly over time. And so he will be developing out for the next couple of years, but he's not procuring more land to do that. And then up here, we have development occurring with Baker Creek North. That's a 10-year development in terms of when that will phase in over time. But if I was a housing developer looking for land today to prepare for what my future, program would be for housing development, I would be really struggling to find some land. This is where we're at. Most of the land we have available today is down here in the 0 to 3 acres. This is usually your larger lots for residential properties. So in McMinnville, we have a lot of 1 acre lots, 190 down here, a lot of 1 acre lots where we say, oh, you can, you who own the 1 acre lot, you could partition that and make 2 homes on that or 3 homes on that. And that's where housing will occur. But those are personal choices. And most of those people are not selling their properties for redevelopment or partitioning. So that all sits down here. Any acreage between 5 and 20 acres, you can see right here, the numbers are really limited. And the ones that are available are fairly quirky, hard to develop, infrastructure is difficult to get there. So developers are literally knocking on doors for people. And any developer who's interested in this map, I'm happy to share it with you. We have, this map shows you everything in brown has a land entitlement on it, so it's already being developed. Over here is Howard Astor's development. Anything that has this green hash mark on it long like this is what we call water zone 2 in our water system. This has no infrastructure to support it. So there's no water being provided for these lands. So these homes are not being built right now, and they won't be built until that water system is developed. It's about an $8 to $10 million system. And right now, Mac Water and Light is trying to figure out how it will be developed, but those costs will be spread across the homes that will be using it. And I can tell you that's a fairly significant lift for those homes in terms of bearing those costs. And so that's going to create an affordability issue for the homes being built up here. Over here is where we show some land as well that's showing up on our books as developable. This is what we call Riverside South. This is a rural residential subdivision that's in our UGB outside the city limits. And per Oregon land use law, we should be able to develop about 520 housing units here. This has been in the UGB for 14 years, and I can tell you not 1 square foot of this land has come into the city to redevelop for housing. We are looking at 6 units per acre. When we say 522 units out here, these are mostly 1 and 2 acre parcels, and these neighbors are not interested in bringing 6 new households and friends to their property to enjoy with them. So those are not moving forward either into the city. So we are fairly constrained right now. So again, establishing need has not been the issue, but how we accommodate it, that really has been. And so we got out and did a survey in the community and said, we want to understand better what you want to do. So we can do a lot of planning that forces higher density residential development within the city, going up with apartments. I can share with you the land use processes I've been involved in McMinnville. Even though people say we do want density because we don't want to expand into the farmland, when we bring that forward into our land use process, it gets a lot of opposition. Then we asked, do you want to just build out and have the same development patterns that we have today in our neighborhoods? And you know, it was mixed response for that. Developing out means you're essentially cobbling up more of the farmland around you in terms of accommodating that population growth. And then we asked the question, what about both? What if we didn't go up as high in terms of apartments and all apartments, which was what this scenario would be, and we did a little bit of both, where we did higher density and some of the lower density, and absorbed less farmland that way. And so this is where a lot of people landed in terms of the both, up, out, or both. So what does that mean in McMinnville? Right now, we have a housing mix of what we call 68% single family detached homes. That's what most of you are familiar with. And then we have 9% single family attached homes. That's townhomes and things of that nature. And then 23% of our housing units are in apartments. This is, you know, fairly normal for a community like this mix, where we're considered an ex-urban environment. So we're close to the metro region, but we're in a rural living environment. So that's fairly normal. The discussion for urban expansion for UGB has been to change this. So write the codes in such a way that this moves to 60% single family detached, and then this moves to 40% in total. So what that means is the new expansion lands will be a lot of high density housing to get these numbers to move in that direction. So in 2018, my team got the direction to pick up the growth planning and figure this out. And we went to city council and said, our suggestion is we do an urban reserve area and an urban growth boundary. That's what I had done in Redmond that was very successful. And we said, let's do that here. Makes a lot of sense because it sort of will solve the problem for everybody about how we grow for the next 50 years in terms of land supply. And then everyone gets comfortable with that. So we got the direction to do that. And then when we went to the state to do it, the state told us they were no longer supporting that type of program, even though they had supported it for 9 other communities up until just about 2 to 3 years ago. But now they're saying they went. And one of the reasons is, quite frankly, they're nervous because McMinnville has been challenged every step of the way in our process, and they're not sure it would stand up to the challenge. These other 9 communities were not challenged. So we went back to city council and said, okay, this is what we got back from the state. You can still move forward, it's legal, but you probably will be challenged in the court system and we may not have the state support for that. So what do you want to do? And we laid out a bunch of different paths for people, for the city council to consider, and all the way down to do nothing. So for those who don't want any growth, we were like, let's do nothing. We'll just tell the state we're not doing anything and see what they do to us. Or negotiate a deal with our opponents, which was Thousand Friends of Yamhill County, or go to the legislator and get it fixed there. Or there were a couple other things we could do. So there was this 2003 work that was done and submitted and went through the Court of Appeals and came back to us on remand. So what the remand said was, you were not going to deny your submittal, but also not going to approve it. You did it wrong, and you need to go back and do the work again. So city council, we went through each of those items and said, this is how it's going to achieve your goals of housing, economy, livability, and costs and things like that. And city council said to us, we want you to go back to the remand. It got remanded back to the city in 2012. And they said, pick that up and see if we can make this work. And at the same time, we want you to prepare for a legislative fix. So if this remand work doesn't work, the city council's direction is we will go to the legislature to find a fix for this. And that's on public record. So that's what we're doing. We're responding to a remand that we got in 2012. It's for a planning horizon of 2003 to 2023. It's called the McMinnville Growth Management Urbanization Plan. It was first submitted to the state in 2003. It got challenged by Thousand Friends of Yamhill County, and several local people. It came back to us. We then sent it back up to the state in 2005, and that's when it traveled into the court system and the Court of Appeals, and it came back to us in 2012-13. So what this work is the original plan was to amend the UGB with everything you see in green and pink here. And when it got to the state, the opposition said, we're okay if you bring in 1, 2, 3, and 4, but anything in pink, we are going to oppose and challenge. So 1, 2, and 4 is all those rural residential lands I told you about. And those are all 4 of these elements came in 2004. And no land has annexed into the city for redevelopment from any of these properties. And then 3 is the McMinnville High School site. So we're trying to achieve a planning horizon to 2023, and within 16 years of that planning horizon, these lands have zero productivity for us in terms of new housing development. At the same time, it's fairly constrained. I told you about the water zone issues over in this area. And then in 2009, Yamhill Water, Soil and Conservation District put a conservation easement on all this property here. And so what that conservation easement says is nothing can be built in this area in perpetuity to preserve a farm that's there. It's a legal document. It's not something that can be broken. And so it's 150 acres, I think, in total. 81 of those acres are in the city of McMinnville and were considered buildable and part of our buildable land inventory at one point in time, and now they're not. And that's important because it's going to come up later in our discussion. So a lot of people ask, can we legally do this? Because now we're in 2020 of a 2023 planning horizon, and we can. And the state supports us in doing this. But if we do it, we have to use the statutes and the administrative rules that were in effect at the time of the original submittal, which was 2003 to 2006. So that's the sandbox that we have to work in to do this work, which has been a lot of fun. trying to find all those rules and regs from that time period. So petitioners who appealed this to the Court of Appeals was mostly Thousand Friends and Friends in Yamhill County. There was one individual locally who was part of that as well. They petitioned it, argued that there were 3 assignments of error, and the court came back and said there's only 1. So they dismissed 2, and it's down to 1 assignment of error. That assignment of error is how we identified the land we were going to grow into to meet our city need. And so it's a big error, but it's down to 1. So we're no longer arguing about what is the need, how much acreage for housing, how much acreage for this, that, or the other thing. We are now just talking about where does it go. So the law tells us that we have to look at different types of land in different order of priority. And you have to look at the first priority to see if you can meet your need there. If you can't, then you move on to the second priority and thus down the chain. In McMinnville, we only have 2 of these 4 priorities. So land adjacent to the UGB, that's an exception area or non-resource land. So that's land adjacent to the UGB that's already developed and not being used for farming. That's a lot of residential areas, or Bunn's Village is a great example of this. And then the 4th priority is the last place you look is agricultural and forest lands, and that is mostly what we have around McMinnville. So looking at this map, it tells you where the exception areas are. So anything that's not tan is an exception area, and then the rest of it is high value farmland. So you will see the 3 that we were allowed to bring in early on in 2004 were all exception areas. And the reason they haven't come into the city to redevelop is because they're, for the most part, developed and people are happy with how they're living there. There's more land around the city that is exception areas that were not brought in, and that's the crux of the argument. And then the rest of it is high value farmland. So we got to work on the problem, and we looked at the McMinnville Growth Management and Urbanization Plan that was submitted in 2003. For those of you who remember, this plan is built upon a community visioning effort that took place in 1997 to 1999 called McMinnville 2020. So we went back to that to see what the vision was there. I was sharing with City Council last night, it's interesting, the vision that's in the McMinnville 2020 is a lot of the same values that I hear today in McMinnville. So I feel comfortable that we're still building upon what McMinnville wants to do. And then here's the number. So here's where it gets a little weird and awkward. We are working within a legal framework and sandbox. And so we are working with data that was produced in 2003 and affirmed by the state and the court system, and that's where we're living. And you're going to say, but that's not where we're at. But that doesn't matter because we're in this legal sandbox. So I always have to just say, this is what we're looking at. The population forecast that we're planning for is 44,055 people. That's an increase of 15,000 people, which is 6,000 new dwelling units. And this is all from 2003 numbers. We're looking for a housing supply target of 60-40. Just to put in perspective, we're at 34,000 right now. Our housing density target is 5.7 dwelling units, and we're currently at about 5.3-ish. Employment forecast is 22,000 employees, and the increased employees is 7,420. That's what our land need is. So we then took all those numbers and we put it into land need, and this is what was affirmed by the court in terms of the need of land for the city in gross buildable acres. We look at buildable acres. And you'll see what's important here is that there's land in here for parks, public schools, religious, government, commercial, and we have a surplus of, that should say industrial lands of 46 acres. So that's based on the land need that was done in 2001, and that's affirmed by the court. We have not had any other land need processes acknowledged in the city except for economic development, which was done in 2013, but that's outside of this legal framework. So we're working with the 2001 numbers. However, we are in our work making a few amendments to this. So back in 2003, there was a lot of discussion and opposition to this park acreage number. And based on that, we went back and forth up and down the state. and appeals, and we ended up subtracting 60 acres from this number for Joe Dancer Park North, which is outside the city but serving the city. And then just recently, we are adding in this effort that 81 acres that's inside the city limits, that's under this perpetual conservation easement that will not allow development to occur on the acreage. So we're saying that's no longer buildable, and so we need to add it to this gross buildable acreage for housing, because that was identified for housing. So that changes our numbers to what you see here in the chart, and that's what we're working on for this UGB amendment. But the other weird piece to all of this is it's had a sort of a phase one element that I walked you through. So there was lands that were already allowed to come in to meet this need, 217 residential acres and 42 public schools acres. So those get subtracted out of these numbers, new housing and public schools. And then we also went through a process of identifying land use efficiencies inside the existing UGB, so how to create more density, and that subtracts out 225 acres as well. So our final numbers for the UGB amendment is here. 259 came in 2004, which we are calling phase one. And then our need now is phase two. So 559 acres of residential, 106 acres of commercial. We have a surplus of industrial and a total of 665. The city has made a decision that's been affirmed that the 46 acres of industrial we're going to retain as surplus because it helps to support our economic development strategy. So we then said, okay, let's start looking around the city and let's look at it from a lens of what makes sense in terms of different areas around the city to expand into. So we created these different areas. And then we looked at the soils map. So this is the driver for Oregon land use, which is protecting farmland. And so it's divided into, I told you around McMinnville is high value farmland. And there's a priority of land that you can look at first. So anything red is called class one. Class one is the last place to look for land to develop into. Orange is class two, yellow is class three, and green is class 4 to 8. So you will see we are mostly surrounded by class 2 lands, and over here in the west area, you have class 3 and class 4 lands. Then we looked at it and said, what's buildable? Because we don't want to look at places that aren't. This is the floodplains around us, and so those all got removed from the chart. And just so you're aware, we did a 1 mile radius from the existing UGB for our study area. So that's the brain looking thing is the 1 mile. And then we looked at steep slopes. So by law, we can eliminate any slopes that are greater than 25%. And that's all the red over here in the West Hills. That's all slopes that are greater than 25%. There's a ridge that runs right along here. And so we eliminated that as buildable area. And so this ended up being our unbuildable map within our study area. And you can see the West Hills was eliminated and then all this floodplain area. And then there's committed lands in here. So this is where you're going to see the exception areas start popping up. So this is a committed area. This is Buns Village, meaning that they're already developed. So with that, we decided to start drawing our study areas, and we looked at picking up, how can we pick up those lower priority lands, yellow and green, and look at those areas first. And so we were drawing those exception lands that are already developed. We drew those, that's down here, Old Sheridan Road. And we started carving things out so that we could study them. And that left us with a map like this. So this is our UGB study map. So we then need to evaluate each of those study areas for what we call adequacy and suitability. And we need to do it with a science. So interestingly, the petition that went to the Court of Appeals I told you about procedure and how that's always an issue. The easiest way to get into the court system as an appellant is to challenge the process and procedure that an applicant used. So then you're not challenging the content and what the outcome was, you're just saying you did it wrong. And so one of the things that was challenged was that we didn't do enough science and screening and evaluation of the study areas, and we didn't do it across all the study areas. So we developed 18 different screening criteria to study each study area. And then within those 18 screening criteria, we have about 50 different data sets we're working with. So we ended up with Excel spreadsheets in a workbook that's about 117 pages that's driving all this data. We looked at what it costs. We looked at, can you serve these lands with sewer, water, transportation? That's the first question. And then the second question would be, how much does it cost to serve these lands? And not only how much does it cost, but what would that look like for cost per dwelling unit? Because based on slope and other things, you may not be able to get as many dwelling units in that area. And then a variety of other things as well. So these are all value systems of either land use or livability issues that are values for the city of McMinnville. Development capacity is where affordable housing falls into place. We also looked at whether it's suitable for commercial or suitable for housing, since that's what's our two needs that we need to satisfy. And then there's a lot of information in here about ag adjacencies and impact to that, because we want to make sure that we're respecting the farmland economy around us. So we started to map it. I'm going to show you the hazard maps because they're the easiest to see, and you'll start to see a pattern come out of this. So this is hazards for shaking. So if an event happens, a shaking earthquake event, where will it occur? I will tell you all of McMinnville is under a very strong shaking hazard, and there are elements of it which are severe, and the severe is, more than likely all structures will be destroyed in those areas. Then we looked at landslide susceptibility. We have significant landslide issues over here in the West Hills. So we're looking at that. Then we looked at liquefaction, and what liquefaction means is if there is a earthquake, your structures will sink because essentially the soils become liquid. And that's a big issue, and I don't think it's something that McMinnville's looked at significantly in the past, but we have we have a lot of concerning high-risk liquefaction soils just on the edge of town. And you'll see one of our study areas got impacted by that, which is over here. But this is all land where any built structure is going to be significantly compromised during an event. We looked at wildfire hazards. This is a hard one to see, but this really lighter yellow color, so this is up by Bertano Lane, is where there's a suspicion that if there was a wildfire, all these structures have a risk for loss because the fire travels down this way through the canyon to here. And so we were looking at those issues. And then this is potential impacts to people and property. It shows that map a little bit better. And we wanted to see where it would occur within the city of McMinnville and our study area. So if you see over here on the west side, very far west side, it's a big issue. And then we put them together to sort of say, what's the story telling us? And the story was telling us over in this west side area is where we're seeing a lot of additive issues all adding up together. Then we looked at natural resources, and there are some critical habitats, wildlife habitats that are impacted around McMinnville. Most of them are birds and aviation habitats, and especially out here in the West Hill area. So there's several different bird habitats. This is a layer, where's my layer one? This is individual bird species. And then here's how they all layer on top of each other. So we wanted to understand that too. And again, you see a story of something trending out here in the West Hills area. So we take all our data and we start applying it based on the court decision and the land use law in this sort of series of sequencing. So we have to look at all the green property first. That's all the exception area. And we say, is it adequate to meet the city's, adequate to develop on? And then is it suitable for the city's needs? And if it is, then we have to bring that land into the city. And then if you don't have enough land in the green, then you go to the yellow, and then you go to the orange, and then you go to the red. So we applied all 18 decision screening criteria and data sets to all these properties. And in the end, we decided based on the priority structure that Old Sheridan Road met the test. Down here is called Booth Bend Road, that met the test. Riverside North met the test if we looked at it a different way, and I'll share with you what that looks like. but that was it for the green areas. And then we looked at yellow, that was our next step. And based on what some of the maps I just showed you, you'll notice that most of this falls away because there's a lot of issues up there. And what ended up meeting the test was West Hill, what we call West Hill South, so just below Redmond Hill Road, and then this property here that's owned by the Rudins. However, to serve West Hill South, the only way to serve this with wastewater and water was a conveyance system that goes right through here. So the state law says if to serve a lower priority land, so lower priority for farming, so we can look at this first, that you need to go through a higher priority land for farming to get there and serve it, you can bring that in if it meets your need. So these two yellow properties were the only ones that met the test. To bring this one in, when we started looking at the orange properties, we had to look at these three right along here first because of the way the conveyance system works. And because of that, they met the land need there to be able to serve this, and that's where we stopped. We didn't even look at the rest of it because we had achieved the need at this point in time, and this land's all coming in to serve this. So that's how we ended up with our UGB land expansion map that we're recommending, which is here, right here. You'll see a couple of outliers, and we'll talk about those, but most of it's in this southwest area here, snugged up against the city. And it would be served with infrastructure that serves all of this. The transportation network can support it. And this is an area where you could do the housing need that's needed, which is that higher density housing that we talked about. So what does that look like? That's that map that I just showed you. This is phase 2. Phase 1, this land that was shared with you earlier, that's already in the UGB serving our needs, even though it's not developing, but by law in our monopoly game, it's serving our needs. So that's in. And so that map I just showed you is representing the phase 2 piece of it. So the end for the UGB amendment for the whole 2003-2023 McMinnville Growth Management Urbanization Plan equates to 921 acres when you add those two phases together. However, you'll see the need has sort of migrated around here a little bit because we're assigning it in different ways. A lot of the commercial land need was based on what we call neighborhood serving commercial. So we want to stop this old Euclidean zoning practice of all residential's on one side of the city, all employment lands are on the other side of the city, and you need to get in your car and drive somewhere to work. We wanted to make, get into a more evolved situation of mixed use neighborhoods. And so, and this was back in that McMinnville 2020 plan that was done in 1997 to 1999. So McMinnville was very progressive in the way it was approaching this, because these are all value systems today that are accepted, but back then they weren't necessarily so. But we were looking at neighborhood serving commercial. So most of it that moved up into here, the residential category. And then we are recommending a land use efficiency for commercial and industrial land. And it's based on a commercial rezone of some industrial land and then looking at other land to bring in for industrial uses. So here along Highway 18, we've been involved in this 3-mile lane area planning process. We have 200 acres of industrial land right down here. This has been in the city and able to be developed for 40 years, and it has not moved. And the reason for that, one of the reasons is because since I've been here, there's been several people who have looked at it. It is very, very expensive to serve this property with water and sewer and transportation. And nobody can make it pencil out because industrial can't carry those types of costs, but commercial can. And so, and it's also expensive land to buy because the price per square foot with the trips going by on Highway 18 escalates the price. So our recommendation is, and we have a need for commercial, this larger commercial. So our recommendation is rezone 40 acres of this into industrial land. And then go find 40 acres of industrial land in the UGB expansion that makes more sense for industrial. And then this commercial product can build the infrastructure, and this industrial product behind it will start to develop because it can tie in to that infrastructure that's been built. These properties out here have all been developing as building and office space and light industrial. And so there's an opportunity to really create this great light industrial office park back here adjacent to the airport. So we looked for land that could work for industrial. And there's this land right here behind Cascade Steel North that we call Riverside North. It's right by the sewer treatment plant. It has adjacency to a lot of industrial uses. It actually has some industrial uses in it. It also has residential uses. And our recommendation is bring that land in as industrial land to replace the rezoned land here. And then we're also recommending bringing in this piece here, which has Joe Dancer Park right down here. And then also this ledge, which allows for some industrial development there. And Mac Water and Light owns it, and they're interested in selling or developing that for industrial. So this leads us to a comp plan map where we have everything in this tan color. So what we're calling urban holding. That's where sort of this, where we want to do more planning for how we do residential and neighborhood serving commercial, but this is all that land need there being satisfied. Red is commercial, so we also said, let's bring in this piece here that's just south of the campus. This is class 3 soil, so we needed to look at it and bring it in, but it makes more sense as commercial than residential, and I think that's pretty obvious to most people. And it would be a great asset to this development. What we want to do with the rest of this land over here is, rather than saying we're going to put the neighborhood serving commercial right here and here and here, we're recommending that the city do area planning for this area. It comes into the UGB, but before it comes into the city, we get down and we start carving off a couple hundred acres, and we really talk about it as a community. How should this develop? And what does it look like? And where does the high density housing go? And where does the neighborhood serving commercial go? And what that will do is it will make it a much more better master planned community and neighborhood system than what you see occurring up here, which is sort of these incremental plan developments that are kind of choppy coming in, and really could have been, you know, if we do the planning in advance, everybody understands what's going to occur here. And so we're recommending an urban holding comp plan designation, which then we do some planning work on before it comes in for annexation. So what is this UGB amendment looks like? 44% of the overall land area is exception areas, so that first priority of land. 8% is class 4 to 6 soils, which makes sense because there's very little of that around McMinnville. 19% is class 3 soils, and 28% is class 2. And there might be some who look at the 28% of class 2 and say, wow, that's a large number. But if you think of the fact that around McMinnville, it's mostly class 2, we're actually able to do a UGB amendment that only has 72% of the land that's not class 2. So that's actually a good number. To put it in perspective, this UGB amendment would be about 0.2% of Yamhill County's overall acreage. So a lot of people get concerned about, wow, big expansion, you know, this is huge for Yamhill County. In the grand scheme of things, it's not. It's 0.2% of the overall acreage in Yamhill County. And then in terms of EFU land, it is 0.4% of EFU land. So it still protects 96.6% of EFU land in Yamhill. Wait, no, I have that wrong. 99.6% of EFU land in Yamhill County. And I think it's important to put things in perspective because sometimes we lose that when we're lost in the numbers, and it prevents us from building for our future generations. And that's what's happened in McMinnville for the past 24 years. We got so lost in the numbers of you're taking too much EFU land that we lost perspective for this. And we are in a place where people, next generation, cannot afford to live here, and we need to start reversing that. So that's the end. This is your final map that we're recommending for the UGB land expansion. And I believe, so next steps. We are going into public engagement and public hearings. I shared with you at the beginning that we're in this legal process. So this is a very controlled public process because of that, but we want to get out as much as we can and tell people what the proposal and recommendation is so that people can participate in the public hearings. Public hearings are scheduled for December 1, 2, and 3. We set up 3 nights deliberately. You can, if you want to attend just one and sign up to testify, you can do that. We will set that up where you can sign up for an appointment to testify in advance in one of those 3 evenings. And then we're doing public information sessions. 4 of them are scheduled right now at a variety of different days of the week, times of the day, so we can get as many people involved in those as possible. And we're thrilled to talk to any different group that wants us to come and talk to them. We're thinking the city council will get through this by December 8th, maybe. And then it will go to the Yamhill County Board of County Commissioners, and it's scheduled to go there on December 10th for public hearing, or the 17th, depending on what happens here with City Council. So that, I believe, is the end of the presentation. I hope I didn't go too long. It's my first time giving it, so 50 minutes, okay.
Heather, that was fabulous. Thank you. That was excellent. Thanks. We got some questions. So let me pull those up if you don't mind. And let's go to the beginning here. All right. Let's see. I'm getting there. Sorry. If someone is able to build in any of those green areas, can they drill a well and create a septic system or drain field instead of having water and those kinds of things brought in?
No, so that's the interesting piece of county city planning is this, in the city you need to connect to the city system, and the purpose behind that is we're at Oregon land use is all about driving density into the city limits. So presumably if you're driving density into the city limits, you don't want a bunch of wells and septic systems because that takes up land. You want people connecting underground to a pipe system. So if it's coming into the system, into the city to redevelop, you have to attach to city infrastructure. If you want to redevelop that property and when it's out in the county, that's a discussion to have with the county.
Mm-hmm. So the land that's over that has been brought into the UGB, where those 100 acres are, I think, over in Riverside.
Yep.
So are those all on private wells, or are they all
Yes.
cities? Oh,
They're
interesting.
not connected to the infrastructure, which is also a reason why it's not redeveloping. So if you think about it, this is the piece of Oregon land. So I've been an Oregon planner for 25 years, and I support the intention of the system, and I don't want anybody to think I don't. But I think there are some pieces of it that need to be rethought. So we are, as cities, supposed to be looking at these exception areas and are pushed legally to bring them in. But if you think about that exception area, those are mostly 1 and 2 acre parcels. So people have homes on them. They like the elbow room. They have water and septic systems. And quite frankly, if you live in the county, you pay 2/3 of the property tax than you would if you lived in the city. You don't have to pay the city of McMinnville property tax levy, which is $5 per $1,000 of assessed value. And oftentimes those properties, if you have a couple animals on them, also have a deferred farm assessment associated with them. So they're paying a lot less taxes. They have elbow room, and they are literally adjacent to the same amenities that people that if they came into the city, they would, access as well. So there's very little incentive for those properties to come into a city unless they're redeveloped as large developments. But they're very hard to redevelop as large developments because developers then have to go out and convince 4 or 5 people to sell their property to get a 10-acre development to make it pencil to build the infrastructure, the sewer and water to serve that development. So it's a catch-22 that's not working.
Yeah. Great response. Thank you. Next question. How can we best support your efforts to finalize this UGB work?
That's a great question. I can share with you, I'm pretty convinced opponents will show up at the public hearing process. So it would be great if you're supportive that you show up as well.
Good. Thank you. And you mentioned testimony. So can people say they can't come to any of the public hearings or anything? They can submit testimony in advance to Claudia Cisneros. Is that correct?
Yeah. So and thank you for that question, Joy. You're right. So you can submit written testimony in advance of the public hearing. You can submit it to Claudia or you can submit it to myself. If you get it to us a week in advance of the public hearing, we will get it to the city council a week in advance too, so they have time to read it. But we will accept written testimony all the way up to the day of the public hearing start. And we will deliver it to City Council as it comes into us. I will tell you, the later it comes into us, the harder it is for City Council to read it and keep abreast of it. So if they get 30 things of public testimony the night before the public hearing, how much of that they're actually absorbing and studying before the public hearing, I don't know, right? So the earlier the better, but yes, we will take written testimony. And in this Zoom environment, written testimony has a lot of, I think, a lot more weight than it has in the past.
Great answer. Thank you. Another question. It sounds like when you expand the boundary to include the properties mentioned, for example, I think about the stuff that's on the west end, the UH part, I'm going to think this is what this refers to. Who owns it, and are they obligated to develop those properties?
No, so private property rights still exist in Oregon land use law and planning. People ask that question all the time.
Yeah.
So no, you know, let's say this property comes in, let's say this property is amended into our UGB, and we don't go around and ask people, do you want to amend into the UGB? Because the law isn't, part of the law isn't, is a property owner wanting to come into the UGB? That doesn't come up in all of our screening criteria. It's all based on the data that the property yields. So we don't even ask them. But we do the UGB amendment, it passes the legal test. They then have the opportunity to annex into the city and redevelop it, or they could sit out here and be a farm.
Okay, got it.
That's what they choose to do.
Okay. Comment, maybe McMinnville will get a Costco.
I don't know. That's something that is not my job. So
I know. I know. Everybody talks about the Costco.
I can tell you we did a market study. So, you know, we did 2 years of work preparing for a new UGB expansion without this building off this remand. And we did a market study, and it showed that we are leaking $97 million of general merchandise retail dollars out of this community per year.
And is that going to places like Portland and Salem?
It didn't say where it's going. It's all comes out of credit card expenditures and things like that. And the online expenditures are a different source of data. But people are leaving town to go. So I suspect they're leaving town to go do larger merchandise shopping. And then we're also, here's the irony of all it. We also have a significant leakage of dollars for restaurants. Even though we are considered a foodie restaurant community, and I think people make a day of it. They go somewhere, they do their big box shopping, and they eat.
Yeah, they make a whole day of it. That makes perfect sense. Someone asked, how do we get copies of the maps?
Anybody can email me, and I didn't put my email in the PowerPoint, so I apologize. Joya can probably get that out to all of you. And I'm going to send a copy of the presentation to Joya as well. And then if you want individual maps, you can email me for that. I do want to give my legal caveat, which I don't have stamped on these maps yet, because I told you we finished these yesterday at 2:45 p.m. But we're going to have to stamp all of them and say draft and potential to change, because legally we have to do that as part of the record. Because we are still pushing on all of this. We're still testing it. There are 1,700 pages of legal record for this project. There are 500 pages in there of objections to it. And so we are trying to plug holes. Right.
Okay. Yeah, imagine how much work this has been for you. Another question, has COVID-19 made us rethink density and increasing new business development to grow more jobs here? Will these slides be posted so we can absorb further? So yes, we've recorded this, it will be posted. And Heather, you're gonna send me the presentation. So do you want me to share the presentation? How would you like me to?
You can, yeah, I mean, you can disseminate it however you want. To the question of COVID, so no, again, my world I have to keep in 2003 and pretend it's back then. But I will tell, so it's not part of the land need analysis, because that's all been affirmed by the court system. I will tell you though that based on, so I shared that I thought, I tell people that my heart hurts for McMinnville that they have struggled with this project so much, because the plan that was put together in 2003 based on that McMinnville 2020 visioning effort is a great plan, and it's a very progressive, and it's what communities are doing today to do good smart growth planning, and it didn't move forward. And I don't know if it was because it was too early, or I honestly don't know. But here, for the long story short, it's based on mixed use development and neighborhoods serving commercial. And so in terms of COVID-19, I actually think it fits in really well.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Will any of your upcoming meetings be on TV channel 11 that we can watch?
Well, that's a great question. And I haven't even reached out to McMinnville Media because we only got approval for the information sessions from from City Council last night.
Okay.
And we'll reach out to them.
Okay. With more housing, who is looking at the streets and roads capacity? I would imagine that would be your job, Heather.
Yeah, so part of our, like I said, the screening criteria, part of it was transportation, engineering, and costs. And so there was, we have spent about $125,000 with an engineering firm to look at capacity issues on the larger network. We looked at it from two perspectives. One, in terms of the new land and providing streets and roads to the new land. So in the hills, that was an issue in terms of the steep slopes. But we also wanted to look at the downstream impact. And what that means is those cars, when they hit the main network that already exists in the community, what will be the impact there as well? And so that was part of our analysis. We will do, after this, if this goes through and gets approved, we then update our transportation system plan. And what that means is we go into the nitty-gritty detail about the transportation network and capacity relative to these lands if they're built. And we'll do that after the area planning so that we understand where the high density residential is going to go, so we can get down into that nitty-gritty detail. So that will happen before it comes into the city.
Wow.
But we're not investing in that effort now because so much money has been invested in those types of efforts for these UGB. I think this is the fourth map in this process of the last 24 years because of how often it's been challenged. And every time a map's put together, it is a lot of work and a lot of money to get it done. Yeah. So to do all that, planning that usually happens after the map anyway, before the map, it's just in a McMinnville environment where it's so litigious. I wouldn't recommend that.
Yeah. Wow. Well, and $1 million of taxpayer money spent to get to this point, and 24 years of work, countless people involved in it. Wow. Yeah.
That's hard dollars. So that's not the hours of community visioning and open houses and staff time and stuff like that.
Right. Wow. Amazing. I don't see any other questions. We'll get this information out to you. Once it's posted up on the chamber website, this recording will be posted for everyone to watch. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Heather, I thank you doesn't seem like enough for all of your hard work on this. I know it has been a huge lift for you and the staff, and I just want to commend you for really all of your diligence on getting to this point and hopefully getting this through and passed.
Well,
so
thank you. And if you do see my team members, please thank them. I have put them through the ringer.
Yeah, well, I think this whole thing has put everyone through the ringer. Appreciate you, really, truly, everything you've done. Thank you for everything. If anyone has any questions, we'll get Heather's contact information sent out, and this will get posted. And I wish you all a wonderful day. Stay tuned tomorrow because we've got someone coming to speak about OSHA rules and regulations, which those are coming up as well. Stay well. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day.